Hi everyone, this is James Hirshfield, the Director of Instruction at Reunion, Florida for 5 Simple Keys. So I just wanted to go over how really rhythm and sequencing can really affect some of the alignments at golf, in particular key number 3, flat left wrist. And just really want to also elaborate on how trying to maintain or hold onto the wrist angles can cause some complications really. So we'll go over that in a little bit. So the golf on the left here, we'll start to see now in full speed, the sequencing is very fast. So the backswing would have a lot of speed and acceleration, basically really leaving no room for him to be able to gather momentum and start to load the wrist angles into the downswing. So what we'd start to see here, so that you see how the angles are loading very quickly and sharply. And this is all happening really quickly during the backswing. Now, with all of the forces getting kind of loaded really quickly in the backswing, it makes it difficult to be able to continue to load them unless you're kind of very aware and have very good proprioception of where your hands and club are in space. So what the tendency would be here is for the wrist angles to start unloading too fast, sending the sweet spot out and start to be across the ball, and in particular a little bit too far behind. So you start to see some heel hits here, and how this alignment is a little bit chaotic here. And it really start to get into its inline condition. Now we know there's some shaft deflection going on. I'm really talking about the angle from the sweet spot to the lead arm. So with all of the acceleration happening in the backswing and all the angles happening too fast, makes it very difficult to really get them to load again into the downswing. So unless you can try and actively maintain the wrist angles through the hit, it gets very difficult. And kind of if you think about how a football player or a baseball player would throw a ball, that right wrist angle kind of loads a little bit in the backswing, and then particularly in the transition, and as the weight would move forward, you'd see that wrist angle would actually start to increase, and then as it gets to impact would start to dissipate those right wrist angles. And again, this has been measured through TPI. So here's a slightly different look of how the sequencing would happen here, and this is a great instructor called Quint, based out in South Africa. So if anyone's out there, I recommend getting to see him, or if he is able to pay a visit back over stateside. So here we'll start to see a little bit of a change in kind of the sequencing of how the wrist angles are going to load gently and very much increase the load in the downswing. Okay, so you really start to see how that change of direction is much more dynamic, and there's more of the momentum gathering in the change of direction, and particularly applying the speed into the downswing. So you can see how the wrist angles are maintained longer. So when we hit the ball, that's where we start to see some of these alignments. Okay, almost potentially even too much. So the goal here was to really feel like that the backswing could slow down a little bit and start to give yourself some time to let the angles load and gather momentum into the backswing. So I'm going to run this through here on the right. So being able to just give a little rock, and then be able to sustain the leverage into the downswing and follow through. So again, you see there's a little rocking motion, and you're going to see how the wrist angles will actually load in the transition and downswing, allowing that wrist angle to be maintained longer into impact. Okay, again, it's being maintained through sequencing and rhythm, rather than trying to manually keep the wrist angle in there. So it starts to stand there through some turf resistance and controlling the sequencing into the follow through, which this golfer here did beautifully. So I hope this has cleared up a couple of kind of misconceptions or possible misunderstandings. And if anyone has any questions, I'm on Twitter @Hirshfield, and I hope you've all had fun, and feel free to shoot me any questions. Thank you.